In this video, I'll provide an overview of our Part 2 assignment for the research project, the Descriptive Statistics. So here we are on the home page. I'm going to go ahead and click on Research Project. And using the Research Project link, you have access to all the components of our project. We're going to go ahead and click on the second tab here for Part 2 Descriptive Statistics. This assignment is worth 10 points and will help you put together the content that will eventually go into your research presentation later in the semester. So in the previous assignment, in Part 1, you identified a city or region you wanted to study, a business idea that you want to pursue in that city, some variables of interest from the data set that you could analyze, and some secondary sources that will help support your study. In this Part 2, you'll be analyzing your data using descriptive statistics. You should have by now already cleaned and filtered your data. And all that means is removing the neighborhoods or variables or aspects of information that are not relevant to your study. So if you are focused in New York and you want to study the Bronx, you should have gone through your data set and removed all the other neighborhoods that are not the Bronx. When you're analyzing your data for the Bronx, it is not going to get impacted by other neighborhoods within New York. If you haven't done this yet or don't recall how to do it, I have a link here to the video from a few weeks back so that you can review and go ahead and clean and filter your data. So while in Part 1, you identified some variables of interest that you wanted to use for your research, and I provided some feedback on if it was appropriate or suggestions for additional variables. Here's your chance to actually play with the data and see if those variables of interest work for you. So if you end up adding or changing your variables of interest, that's totally fine. And again, I've provided a link here to the data dictionary that has the list of all the variables in your data set with the definition and some ideas. So you can always go back in there to review. For this assignment, it's a 1 to 2 page single-spaced business memo. And if you need a template for your business memo, you can click here and download that. It's in Word. And so component 1 of this assignment is based on your discussion board 6. So you will have discussed with your group where your data set came from and some potential issues about the data. You want to explain how the data was collected. In other words, how did the data eventually get to you, and how might that affect the results of your research? If you forget, you can click on this link here, and this just takes us to the Inside Airbnb. So this is the website where the Airbnb data came from. Note that this is an independent third-party website separate from Airbnb. So what you'll have to do is a bit of secondary research by going in through here and reading how was the data collected. It started in Airbnb, but then this third party came along, took the data, and then your professor, that's me, downloaded the data for you. I cleaned it and then gave it to you, and then you cleaned it as well. So as you can see, it's like playing telephone. The data has gone through multiple hands before you got it. And so be aware of the potential issues that the data faces. And also, when you look at your data, do you notice anything strange? Are there blanks? Are there typos? Is the Bronx listed 3 different ways? There are always issues with data because data is often collected by humans and from humans. And so we need to be aware of that so that we can judge the accuracy of our analyses. In step 2, you'll be creating some descriptive statistics based on chapter 2 or 3, and I'm going to show you briefly some examples of how to do that. Not only will you create the descriptive statistics, you should explain what they are showing to a decision maker. You cannot assume that when someone sees a chart or a number that they know what you mean. In part 3, now that you've created some descriptive statistics on your data, you'll want to explain some potential business implications based on this preliminary data analysis. So now that you've seen the data in a chart or a numeric measure such as an average or standard deviation or median or mode, what can you do with it? How can it inform your business, your marketing, who you target as a customer base? And so I do want to emphasize that you need to make sure your data file is clean. So remove any of the neighborhoods you're not studying, because if you leave it in and you try to run some of the descriptive statistics that I'm about to show you, it's going to include data that you weren't interested in. Down here below, there's also a link to view an example of some descriptive statistics. So I'll click right here. So all of our examples are neatly in one place, but we're just going to focus on this example part 2. And I'm going to open it up. And so we can see here, this student has answered parts 1 through 3 of the assignment for descriptive statistics, including a chart, some numeric measures, another chart, an explanation of the data. And so use this as a guide, but it is not necessarily perfect. It's a good example. So you want to make sure to follow the instructions to make sure that you've addressed each piece of the assignment. So now let's go ahead and look at some examples of descriptive statistics that you could run. And I'm going to pull up my Montreal file again. Now, one thing I might want to do, for instance, after I've cleaned my data and deleted any data that is not relevant to my study. So for instance, one of my variables of interest might be price per night. Now I've got all this data here, and I want to know the numeric measures with it. Now in our chapter 3, we learned how to do it by hand, but since we're working with such a large data set, I strongly recommend that you use Excel to calculate your information. Now in the previous weeks, I provided instructions on how to add the data analysis Toolpak. And so when you're in Excel under the Data tab, here on the right, after you've added the Data Analysis Toolpak, this Data Analysis button should appear. If you have not added the Data Analysis Toolpak, whether you have a PC or a Mac, I will provide the instructions again in Canvas so that you can add it into your Excel. Now, if I open up my data analysis, I just click right here, a window will appear that offers all the different types of statistical tools at my disposal. So you can see here we already have descriptive statistics highlighted, but if you didn't, note that the list is in alphabetical order, so anything that we'll be working on in the semester, there's likely a tool in Excel that can do this for you. So I just click on descriptive statistics and click OK, and it's going to ask me what is my input range. I want to analyze my price. So I'll click on the blue button here and go ahead and select all my data. I think I can just select the column, and so it's going to highlight everything in column P for price. And when I hit my blue button, it'll bring me back to my main menu. I will check labels in first row because as you can see, we do have a label here. It says price, and what that will do is make sure that it does not include this word price in my analysis. I'm going to go ahead and let my descriptive statistics appear on a new worksheet because our file is so large. And so I also want to click Summary Statistics when I hit OK. And so now my descriptive statistics have appeared on another tab. So here we've got our mean calculated for us, and I can actually modify this because I know we're talking about price. So I can change this, for instance, into currency. I hit the dollar button right here. And so the mean, or the average nightly price for Airbnb homes in Montreal is $89.01. Note that all the pricing in the Airbnb file is in US dollars, so you don't have to do any kind of conversion if you're working with a foreign country. We have our standard error, we have a median. Again, we know we're working in dollars, so the median cost per night is $73. And again, the median, it leaves out the extreme low values as well as the extreme high values. We have our mode, so the most common nightly price is $50. We have a standard deviation of about $140.21. So when we talk about how many standard deviations away a value of X is from the mean, we know that the increments are at 140. We have our sample variance. Perhaps you want to know the minimum cost per night and the maximum cost per night. This number right here looks extreme to me, so I'm curious, is this some mansion or very large compound that you can rent per night? But that would allow me to go back into my data and do a quick search and find out, well, what was this really expensive house here? As you can see, we've got the value right here at $95.97, and I can just look that up. And so that's how you could run the data analysis Toolpak to get your descriptive statistics pretty readily. So now let's say we want to do some descriptive statistics in terms of a chart, like in chapter 2. I'm actually curious what kinds of beds are available in Montreal. So I might want to do a pie chart by bed type. So I'll go ahead and go here to my column O. And so a nice trick that will let me select all my data without having to drag my mouse all the way down is to hold Control, Shift, and push the down arrow on your keyboard. So now you can see I've just selected all my data values in column O down to the 6,827th row. Now what I'll do is I'm actually going to create a pivot table first because that will do the counting of my information. So I'll go to Insert and click Pivot Table. This is on PC. If you're on a Mac, I believe the pivot table is under the Data tab. So when I hit Pivot Table, it's going to ask, where do you want to put it? I will go ahead and have it on a new worksheet. And when you click OK, now I have my pivot table ready to go. Let me zoom in just a bit. So here you see on the right-hand side are the pivot table fields. We want to create a table using our bed type. So I'll go ahead and click on bed type and drag it into my rows. So you can see now all the different types of beds are provided here on the left side. And I want to, again, drag my bed type into values. And in this case, Excel defaulted to count, which is correct. We want to count the number of beds. And with that, we now know how many air beds, how many couches, how many futons, or real beds and sofas are in my Montreal Airbnb listings. And I didn't have to count it by hand, which saves me a lot of time. So with this information, I can now create a pie chart because I'm looking at parts of the whole. Alternatively, you could argue and do a bar chart as well. Perhaps let's do both charts and see which one makes more sense. So if I select all my data, go to Insert, and select Pie Chart, we can see my pie chart types here. I'll make it a little bit bigger, and I'll move my title up here. We want to call this Montreal Bed Types. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so I can move this towards the center. And it might be helpful if I add labels, although I've got my legend over here to the right. And as you can see, it looks a bit awkward here. So what I would probably want to do is also format my data series, which will actually let me change the angle. See how I moved right here on the right hand side? It lets me move the angle of my pie slices just a bit. So this way, now I'm slightly at an angle, and I can pull out my numbers a little bit further for easier reading. So we can see right there. And perhaps I want to, if we go back to formatting our data labels, I want to include the percentage as opposed to the value, right? So now I can see it in percents. And I also want the category name. But now we can see that that will affect how my labels look. And so you can move it a little bit here so it's easier to see. And so because my airbeds and my couches are such a low number, it does say 0%. So that's how we would do a pie chart using our pivot table information. Let's go ahead and do the same thing again, but for a bar chart, because I'm curious, but maybe a bar chart would be a better idea for showing what kinds of beds Montreal has in its Airbnb listings. So I'll go Insert, and I'm going to look for my bar chart option. And as you can see, this is what a bar chart would look like. So now that I've compared, the pie chart makes more sense. Not only by definition, where the pie chart tells us parts of a whole, and so each of our types of beds is parts of the whole listings in Montreal. It's just also easier to see visually in comparison to our bar chart here. And so that's what you'll want to do for the Part 2 assignment. In our discussion board prior to Part 2 being due, you'll actually want to share some of your descriptive statistics with your group. That way they can provide feedback on perhaps how to work with your labels or colors, or if you had two kinds of charts, which one works better. And if you have any questions, just let me know.